Thanks everyone. Appreciate the time. We're gonna talk a little bit today about our on-farm field trial program, and I'm joined here by 4 of our FBN growers who have actually participated in this program before, so they're going to be the stars of the show. But we also have RJ here, who leads our farmer-facing operations as part of the program, and I lead the broader R&D team at FBN, so really focused on helping us evaluate new technologies and ultimately get them to a point where we feel like they could potentially be commercialized. You know, really our job is to screen all the new innovations coming in the ag space and try to make sense of them, figure out which ones are legitimate, which ones are not, and how we can help them be successful on farm. So very excited to tell you a little bit more about the program, and just have a few intro slides that we're going to talk through first before diving into the panel. So if whoever is advancing the slides can go forward, we'll talk through this first. So the broader context of why we started this program is really recognizing the fact that there's a huge diversity of new technologies that are really potentially changing the way that crop inputs work pretty substantially. But first of all, there are some things that are not changing, right? And these are some of the core farmer problems and needs that I think are very evergreen, even though the way that we're trying to solve these problems are changing. So first of all, we're always going to have pests and weeds, pathogens, right? These are not going away. We also need to supply crops with nutrients, right? This is, again, something that's just going to be, it's true now, it always has been true, it's probably always going to be true. And farmers need to have operational efficiency and profit on their farm, right? These are 3 things that are going to stay true. If we advance one, we can see, you know, today the way that we've developed tools to solve these problems is largely through synthetically produced pesticides, synthetically produced fertilizers, and genetically modified traits. And these technologies, frankly, work very well, for the most part, to solve the problems that we just talked about. That being said, there's a lot of innovative companies working on trying to solve some of these same problems, but in a very different way. On the crop input side, there's a tremendous interest, particularly in biologicals. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is an area with just a wealth of investment right now. There's also companies working on applying the same inputs more efficiently, more precisely, or through different mechanisms, maybe robots that are replacing some of the need for crop inputs. And on the seed trait side, there's also companies taking new approaches to trait development. We're not going to talk about that today. But the point here is that there's a lot of innovation and money and smart people working on trying to change that middle column to be something different. And whether or not we like that or don't like it or think it's, you know, going to work or not, we want to be really leaders in looking at the data and just devising how we can capture some of these opportunities. So the next slide, you know, this is just a few statistics on how quickly some of the innovation in alternatives to traditional crop inputs are developing. Almost all of the investment in new companies in the crop input space is not going to companies developing synthetic chemicals. It doesn't mean that we think they're bad or they're going away, because I don't think either of those are true, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on to try to take different approaches to developing crop inputs that are more natural in nature. Whether or not they work or not, as we'll talk about here, is a different story, and how well they work in different environments is a very different situation than traditional crop inputs, but this is where a lot of innovation is really occurring. This investment has doubled just in the past couple of years, and the market size for farmers is also growing much, much faster than any other crop input sector. On the next slide, we talk through some of the long-term trends I think that are driving this, right? I think first of all, we have really high input costs. Don't need to tell anybody here that the past, you know, year and a half or so have led to both supply disruptions and cost disruptions that are really significant. We also have labor costs. This is more of a factor in specialty crops and row crops, but it's a factor everywhere to some extent, that are leading to more focus on how we can apply crop inputs very precisely. There's also scientific advances that are enabling new approaches to solving some of these problems, right? Computational advances, understanding of basic biological and chemical systems, right? Some of these things have evolved in a way that are creating new ways of solving crop input challenges. There's also increasing environmental regulation, right? This can be something we agree with or don't agree with, but again, it doesn't matter. It's happening, right? It's going to keep happening, particularly in other countries, but increasingly in North America as well. Some of this is regulatory driven, some of this is consumer driven. And again, whether or not we like it doesn't matter. The fact is it's happening. We have to figure out how we respond to it and are proactive there, not reactive. We also have growing resistance issues. Again, not a surprise to anybody here, but given the last bullet, which is the relative lack of new inputs coming to market in the synthetic chemistry space, resistance issues to traditional products is actually becoming a very significant problem in many weeds and regions, right? That there are not necessarily a lot of chemistries that are nearly as effective as they once were. And that combined with the lack of new products coming to market means, something's got to give in the long term. So if we go to the next slide, one of the reasons that we really started our on-farm trialing program is to solve what we view as one of the biggest issues today, which is the fact that there are just a tremendous number of companies developing crop inputs, biologicals, biostimulants, biopesticides, new fertilizer products. There's a ton of innovation going on. That's a good thing overall, but one of the challenges it presents is that it's really hard to know what's really good and what's more marketing and more hype than it is actual science and substance. And it's been hard for us to tell. I think it's been hard, we'll hear from the panel, I think it's been hard for many farmers to tell of all these hundreds of companies that are selling products and frankly many making claims that are fairly similar in nature, which of these are really, really good and which of these are maybe not going to be as effective on their farm. So we launched our on-farm trial program, which we call the Innovators Research League, which is really geared at generating on-farm data about how products work out in the real world, right? This has been a core part of the FBN ethos since day one, where we've been, we've shown seed performance and product performance and pricing information, again, based on real-world grower data, not based on research data, not based on intuition, not just based on what your friend said, not just based on what the sales rep said, but actual real-world data. The goal of this is to help us pick the products that are actually going to be effective and also then help our farmer members use these products in a way that's going to be most effective on their operation. So the way this works is we partner with innovators in the space, right? So we don't do basic R&D in biologicals, right? We don't develop new products, we don't discover new products. That's not a role that we're playing today. But there's hundreds of companies who are, where we have very complementary strengths. We can partner with those companies to take those products out to the real world, leverage the amazing FBN grower network who has tons of progressive growers who are eager to test new products on their farm, where we can generate really good data on how these products work and use that to decide which of the products, if any, do we want to actually commercialize, and then do so in a very data-driven, transparent way based on real farm data, not just based on research data. One of the biggest barriers that we see in the market today that makes it hard for new technologies to be adopted is that a lot of times companies go to market without a lot of robust data on how these products work out in the real world, right? The number of companies that come to us that have great data from the lab, great data from a greenhouse, great data from small plot trials, that don't have this real world validation that what they've learned in a research setting scales to the real world is pretty eye-opening, right? And it's a really big limiting factor to the biological space growing because farmers want to see what happens in the real world, right? And I 100% agree with that, right? It's critical to see that what we see in the lab, in the greenhouse, and research farms actually scales out to the real world, and it doesn't always do so. Right? We've seen a lot of technologies that look really, really good. They've got really sound science behind them. But when you have to go out to real world farms, real soils, real equipment, real field variability, the product gets applied 2 weeks late because the field's wet and the product doesn't work, right? That's a problem because that's what real world farming is like. So it's very important for us to get independent, unbiased, real world data that tells us whether or not these technologies are valid in a real farming environment, which is where they have to work to be successful. We can also help some of these companies actually access a grower network and help our farmer members get access to a wide set of new technologies as well. So just a quick logistics about how this works, right? These are large scale trials, right? So these are not small plot trials. These are not 4 rows by 50 feet in a research farm. These are done on a real FBN member's farmer field. Typical size is at least 40 acres, often larger, and in replicated strips so that we're getting statistically very high quality data about how these products are performing on these fields that we're testing them in. That's the gist of it there. I think we might have one more slide, or else we're going to go to the panel now. Anything else here, or are we good to move? Okay, I think we're going to go to the panel now. So really appreciate everyone's time. I want to let everybody introduce themselves. Yeah, okay, we had a little bit on data collection here. We don't have to go through this until we'll just go to the panel. It'll be more interesting than me talking. So we can let RJ introduce himself, who works on the program, and who many of you probably have talked to, and then let the panel introduce themselves. And we have a few questions prepared, but very much look forward to audience questions for the growers who've actually participated in this program in the real world themselves. So RJ, you want to take it over and pass it on?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So my name is RJ Kreckler. I'm the operations manager for our R&D program here for this particular program, the on-farm trial program. I've been with FBN for about 4 years. This is my second farmer to farmer, and been in the ag industry my whole career, about 16, 17 years, something like that. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. They'll just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, any other details you want to give, and then we'll get into the discussion here.
Thanks. My name is Andrew Tenold. I'm from Joyce, Iowa, very north central part of the state. Raised corn and soybeans, basically on a 50-50 rotation. And I guess I kind of got started with the research league, basically doing a lot of trials on our own anyway, and saw the space. And like it was already mentioned, it's nice to try, some of these products on your own farm in a large scale portion. So I guess that's kind of what attracted me to partaking in the program.
My name is Josh Moore from Morrilton, Arkansas. It's right in the central part of the state, farm right along the Arkansas River. Been around farming pretty much all my life because my dad, he just retired from farming, so I've been around it. I'm a full-time firefighter, paramedic, so when I'm not there, I'm down on the farm working, so I love doing that. But, we do trial stuff all the time, and whenever I was watching a webinar one day with FBN, because I'm a CB, I sell chemicals through FBN, but just learned about the Innovators Research League, thought it was a good idea, needed to try it and do something large scale on our farm. I mean, we do trials all the time, every year, whether it be soybean, corn, herbicide trials, whatever, and thought this was going to be a good fit, and it's been enjoyable to do this year. So.
Hi, I'm Clark McPheeters. We farm in Gothenburg, about 250 miles west of here in the Platte River Valley, and grow white and yellow corn for tortilla chips, some soybeans, some alfalfa, have some rangeland. And my background's a little bit different than some farmers. I actually went to engineering school and worked as an engineer for a couple of years before coming back to farm. So I take a little bit different tack maybe because of my training. But yeah, we trial a lot of things on our farm. It's a pretty big I've joked sometimes that every field is an experiment. There's always something going on in each one. And so glad to be here with you today to talk about that.
I'm Brent Rendel, farm in northeast Oklahoma. Basically go about 5 hours straight south of here and you're going to be at my farm. It's all dry land. We do winter wheat, corn, soybeans. Every acre of winter wheat also gets planted back to soybeans. So we grow 4 crops every 3 years on a given piece of ground. I've been involved in on-farm research for a long time. I too have an engineering background. I'm a mechanical engineer from Oklahoma State, and then was a nuclear engineer in the Navy for a while, and then went back to the farm. So numbers and data always spoke to me. So whenever FBN brought out the invitation for the Innovators Research League, it fit right into my wheelhouse.
Awesome, thanks guys. Real quick, just for the group in the audience here, show of hands, who has done a trial on your farm in the past? Most everybody. I saw a lot of hands. So, and I don't think that's uncommon. I think you're probably, if you're not testing something in some way, it doesn't have to be a real formal test, but I would guess that everybody every year does something to try to learn what works on their farm, what can I do better next year, that type of thing. So one of the questions I had for you guys, and maybe I'll drill this in to the two engineers on the end. I'm gonna call you guys engineers now.
You end up sitting next to each other. That's what I don't know.
So you know, the way that you, I'm thinking about a protocol for a trial. You know, how do you think a trial needs to be structured in order to get the best data and really learn the most from it and understand really what happened in that field in that year?
Well, I mean, I'll start since I have a microphone. It's not necessarily, in my mind, as important how you structure it, although you need to think about what am I testing, and then that sort of naturally lends itself. If I'm doing an A/B test, product being used or not being used, okay, large strips really work well, split planter if you have that capability, things along that line. If you're going to test more things, then you've got to start bringing down the size to get your replications. But the most important thing about the test is the design and taking the time in advance. And that's where you guys came in. You sent us an email with, here's how you do it. Yeah, your field's going to be uniquely configured, and we can adjust from there. And you were quite adaptable to that. But it's that design part, because if you start out with a bad design, and I've done it, you get really bad results, and so it's a complete waste of your effort.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of what Brent said. The design is important. That's one thing I appreciated about working with FBN is they had a pretty specific plan, how they wanted to try, and we discussed it, how to lay out the trial. We have, sometimes equipment can present a challenge, so we were running a 24-row planter and a 16-row head on the combine, and so I ended up planting 2 passes with the planter, so I had 48 rows, so I wouldn't be picking half pass, passes that were, half of the corn head width, mixing the strips in the trial together. So, yeah, be mindful of that when you lay things out. I agree on the split planter idea, especially with regard to on-seed treatments. If you have a CCS planter, that one is easy. That's a simple one to do. Liquid doesn't work quite as easily that way usually on a planter. It's kind of hard to do a split planter liquid trial, but think about how you're going to harvest it and how you're going to gather the data when you lay it out. Yeah. And I would agree, lots of replications. Keep in mind, replications don't necessarily have to mean passes. Whatever shape you can draw, if you can draw 10 different strips across an AB, that's a replication, right? So, but yeah, the data analysis part of it is a good way to think about it. Maybe you want to run a strip across a piece of variable ground and see how it does on 2 different soil types. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to pick the most uniform piece of ground so that you have eliminate a variable in that analysis. So just some things to consider, I guess.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a right answer, but consider those things.
Yeah. For Josh and Andrew, maybe since they talked a little bit about their experience specifically with FBN's on-farm trial program, maybe you guys can give a little insight into what your experience was like working with us this year and what you learned, and I'll take some feedback too if you think we can do things better. But tell us a little bit about what your experience was like.
This year it was seamless. Got signed up for it. They gave me the protocol, what I was going to do on our particular farm. The correspondence back and forth with RJ, was flawless. Laid it out, just like he said, laid it out exactly what we needed to do. And then, got all the, my planter set up for it, put all the stuff in my precision, and climate, and then just give them the data back. So it was, they give you stuff, what you had to do, certain rates and stuff, and then all I did was send it back into, data at Farmer's Business, and then they get the information as soon as I do so every step of the way I was sending them data. So it was flawless this year. I mean, it worked perfect, and give them the data, get the information back. So worked pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything that's been said. I had done 3 separate ones, two in furrow, and then this fall in the strip till machine, again did a dry product, and again they were all laid out perfectly, and the easy use has been great too. The products, mixing, instructions. The layout, the design, were all very good, and if you had to change the protocol a little bit, like Clark did, to make it match up with the combine, we did that as well, and really there wasn't any issue to do that.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about just your mindset when you think about testing new products. So what is important to you? Well, first of all, are you just open to testing anything, or are there very specific types of products that you're interested in testing? And then once you decide, hey, I want to try something on my farm, what data are you looking for to understand if it worked and how effective it was for you? So let's start on the end with Brent. How do you think about that?
Well, it's, I'm interested in testing something that's going to make me more money. At the end of the day, that's what I'm after, is ROI. I'm not as interested in yield. I want more yield, but if I can use a product that will allow me to save on my inputs, so my expenses go down, hey, that's great. But as far as what I test, everything's wide open on that. I'm not too limited. It's just, but I also want something that fits into the way I farm. So it's got to be something that works. If I have the capability to do in-furrow application, but I've only had that about 5 years. So if somebody had approached me with that 6 years ago, I couldn't do it. There are some products now that need a 2x2 application. Well, I don't have that capability. So, it's got to be something that fits with me. But I like that you guys are looking into it, because if the data shows that it has a pretty good chance, hey, now maybe I can do an investment on my end. But that's kind of my perspective.
Yep. What maybe enhance a little bit on so you're looking at yield and then costs, and to determine ROI. That's really the 2 factors you're looking at. Like, hey, did it make me money?
Yeah, I like to see pictures of these seedlings with these big root balls and these leaves and these comparisons. They mean absolutely nothing. They mean that they tell you about some potential of things, and I've used some products in the past in some testings that have produced massive amounts of young plant roots, and I have never seen a yield difference at the end. And if there's not a yield difference at the end, it just made for a really pretty infant plant. And so, I want to, at the end of the day, for me, it is about the dollars in my pocket.
Yeah. I'm going to shift over here to Andrew to pick up this one, because you and I talked a little bit about the convenience factor, and of course it has to pencil out. That makes sense. But do you think about it in other ways as far as the value that product brings you when you're testing it?
Yeah, again, we're open to trying just about anything on our farm as well, as long as, potentially something that we're possibly looking for, something that we're missing. But when we're looking for products, I guess, we did have one this spring, the easy use. It was something that required refrigeration. So we were able to make it work. It's just now, can you scale it? We saw positive results on it, but going forward, how are we going to manage that? Because obviously for the entire operation, we're not able to keep the entire product in refrigeration. So go through things like that, I guess. But but anything from dry fertilizers to seed treatments to anything in furrow, anything foliar, we'll try most of it, I guess.
Okay. I'm going to, for the next question, for Clark and Josh, I want to shift a little bit to expand a little bit. You guys, we've been talking about trials that you guys do on your own farms and how you analyze that data. How important is it to you to also see data from the same trial in other locations and other states, other counties? You know, how do you use that data to look at, like, hey, is this something I want to use, or is it pretty much, hey, what it did on my farm is what I'm going to look at?
Sure, I would say local is best, and by local I mean your farm or neighbor's farm is the best data. But one thing you can glean from a product that has been tried widely across the country is you can assume it's going to be possibly more resilient based on weather conditions. There are some products that might work, you know, in a dry year, might work in a wet year, and not the other way around. But I feel like I gained some information from that by assuming that the weather conditions are not going to be consistent across, you know, the whole, you know, corn growing region, for example. That's of value, but I wouldn't take a product like that and apply it across the whole farm just based on someone else's results. I would trial it first.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, do this like he said right there. Whatever works on somebody else's farm generally doesn't work on ours. It's just how it is in Central Arkansas. It's crazy. You know, down in the South, it's a different animal for sure for us. So we do a lot of different things, and we look at other areas in the state also and around to, just like you said, see how resilient it is, see if it's going to work. Because, you know, sandy loam type ground, it's subject to flood at any time, and it's just variations through the field a little bit. But just trying it out on our farm, we do that, and if it works, we'll try it again next year on a little bit larger scale. And then, you know, stuff is always continually changing with seed, chemical, anything, so we're always doing that. But just whatever works on somebody else's generally don't work on ours, so we have to do stuff all the time on our own just to see because of our type of ground. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think everybody has a different comfort level with how quickly you adopt a new technology. So maybe, and I do want to hear from everybody on this question, and Josh, you kind of just answered it where you tried a little bit and then you grow a little bit more. If you want to go into more, you know, maybe talk about, use an example of a product that you use today that you use on all your acres. How did you get to that point to understand, like, hey, this is something that's going to be valuable to me all the time, every year? How did you start there? How did you get to that point? Did you do a test in the first year, and then how did you grow to that point? Just each of you individually, kind of let us know how you get through that type of, you know, process.
I don't know about a specific product, like you know, something on our planter. We've seen a lot of stuff on the hydraulic downforce. So once we seen some data on that and went to some guys and seen emergence and stuff, we outfitted our 40-foot planter with hydraulic downforce, and that's been a game changer right there for us. Getting even emergence up because of the cold, you know, sometimes cold weather, and getting it put across the farm. You know, the variability that we have between burying it over here in your sandy ground to not taking the ground here, but now it's the same all the time. So once we've done that, we just like never go back without it on our farm. It works perfect. I love it.
Yeah, I guess for us, really a lot of different applications. But I would say a product, not necessarily a specific product, but soybean fungicide. We tried it year after year and saw year after year, we saw a wet year, dry year, we would see, you know, 3 to 5 bushel. So that's kind of something that now we just do every year across every acre. But still, when we do that, we're still leaving check strips in about every field. You know, we're using different soybean fungicides, so we're still trial those against each other. But it's kind of a standard practice now. But yeah, we're still trialing it and leaving check strips in the field without it. And you know, some of these things, you know, a lot of times we like to try things for 3 years, I would say. before we'd implement it across all of our acres. Just because in north central Iowa, we can get a frost in early June, early September, wet, dry. We kind of have it all. So typically we like to try it for 3 years, but some practices as well. We hired no-till drilling and strip till for about 10 years before we adopted it on our own farm on our own scale. So it could take 3 to 10 years, I guess, to the extreme.
Clark, what's your adoption process? How do you get complete buy-in in your mind after testing something?
Sure. We sometimes joke that we like to be the first to be second. We watch our neighbors do it. No, I'm just kidding. In all seriousness, sometimes we do. But I would say, at least with regard to testing products, I generally run some kind of a strip trial, and if I think it shows promise, if data analysis shows promise, then sometimes I'd go as fast as the whole farm with check strips the next year. That's kind of the way we did it with Pivot Bio, and interestingly enough, with Pivot Bio, we kind of compared notes amongst the group, and it works for some guys, it doesn't for others. I kind of likened it to soil in that manner. We've never applied a ton of lime on any of our ground, and there are some guys in this group, I'm sure, that apply a lime every year. So your mileage may vary, but yeah, I tend to be pretty quick. You only get 40 or 50 at bats, right, in farming, and our cycles are very long. Yep. So you have to change pretty fast if you're going to make a very big distance in changes.
Yep.
I tend to hold to that 3-year thing. For me to adopt a new technology, it needs to perform. What I generally like to see is somewhere around a positive 50% ROI in an average year. I know there's going to be some years it's not going to perform at that level, and that's okay. That's kind of why I build in. 50% ROI is a pretty hefty return, but like I say, I like to see that 3-year test, but I'll scale up. Maybe it may be 1 or 2 locations on farm year 1. If it shows some promise in year 1, I may expand it. If it doesn't show any promise, I don't abandon it, because 1 year doesn't make a test. And I'll say this year's tests on everything I tried, not just with the Innovators League here with FBN, were a complete failure because my summer crops were a failure. We had a drought, like a lot of you guys probably went through too, and ours was utter disaster. So but that doesn't mean I'm not going to test it again. And I will say though, you said some things that maybe one thing we've done. I'm going to give you 2 examples. One's a positive, one's a negative. On the positive side, something I'm doing now, and it's not a product, it's actually soybean seeding rates. I did a 3-year test through another research group I'm with, and it was my own test design looking at populations, and what I discovered is that if I'm planting in good soil conditions early, 60,000's enough. The data was very conclusive. Now, I don't plant down to 60,000. I plant early at about 80,000, but I used to be planting at 120,000. So I dropped my early seeding rate by a third, and that's significant savings. But what I also found out in that same test was that once I went to the late end of the season, I couldn't put on enough seed. So my average seeding rate for soybeans hasn't changed. What's changed is early in the season, I'm not putting on anywhere close to what I used to be putting on, and late in the season, I'm putting on quite a bit more seed than I used to. And it's really interesting. Early in the season, I'll be targeting about 80,000. At the end of the season, I'm targeting at least 160 to 180. And that's how much of a change is needed. And yield is stable across there as far as, I'm not raising yield by adding that seed. I am preserving yield because of things. So that's the positive change. The negative change, and it only took 1 year to do, and I'm not going to name the product because it was not a product failure. It was something that they didn't quite identify whenever they fielded it out, and it was an in-furrow product for use in corn. And I tried it, and it was one I worked with the company on. They provided me free product to try it, and what we discovered is that if you use that product in furrow, it will reduce germination rates, and it will reduce emergence rates, and it will reduce yield. And they now no longer, it specifically says on the label, you will not put it in furrow. You will put it 2 inches away from the seed if you want to use it. And they didn't know that. They did not do enough pre-marketing testing, and marketing pushed them. And I talked with the researcher. He's like, we knew we didn't have quite enough information on this, but they thought it was ready. It turns out if it's cool, wet soil, there are problems. And they hadn't tested it in anywhere that had cool, wet soil at planting conditions.
I have one last question, and then we'll see if the audience have any. So I alluded to this earlier, but I'll be very blunt about it, right? When companies come to us, they have a new product, they say, look, the science is really good, you should sell it. And we kind of say, well, I don't care, right? Then they say, well, the lab data looks really good, you should sell it, and still say, I don't care, right? They say the greenhouse testing looks really good, and still are like, well, that's good, but it's not enough. They might say, well, we did a bunch of small plot tests, and in 50 different trials, and these small plots, it looks really good, you should sell it, and we still say that we're not convinced, right? At least my personal perspective and what we've seen is to insist on actually seeing it out in the real world, right? To get it into varying environments, real grower equipment, real field variability, real application timing, which is not always going to be at the right time. That's just how things work, right? It's going to be applied late. If the field's wet, it's going to be tank mixed with other products. It's going to have to be applied through all sorts of different types of equipment and different field environments. And that's the data that, unless I see that, like I personally don't feel comfortable going to our growers and saying, you should use this, because I just don't trust it, right? And we've seen so many times when things look good in small plot data that doesn't scale to the real world. So as you can tell, I have a very extreme view on this, but I'm curious for your guys' thoughts. Like, tell me where I've got it right or where I've got it wrong. Am I too extreme on this? Where do you agree, disagree, as you're thinking about new technology?
I don't know. You're not getting any argument from me.
No, I would strongly agree with that. The more data, the better, really, on testing. Lots of situations, lots of different application methods. Sometimes it even comes down to compatibility with your application equipment. I had a product that I wanted to put in furrow and handed the bag to the guy who was helping me load the planter and said, here, dump this in the saddle tank. And spent the next 2.5 hours cleaning filters because the product apparently was not compatible with screens. And so that can happen sometimes. So you watch out for that, right? I mean, that's kind of another FBN level question is, what kind of systems can you actually put this through, regardless of whether it works or not. That's always a good question to ask too.
Yeah, I agree. Even on our farm, we don't necessarily even care for plot data. Maybe for plant characteristics, height, girth of the stalk, things like that. But they perform completely different on a whole-scale farm, a farm with a lot of terrain, things like that. So we like to have it across as many acres as we can and see. And, back to, other products that some of the panelists up here, it works great in theirs, doesn't necessarily work in our area. And, there's a lot of companies that claim that they do certain things, and maybe they do, in some places, but not everywhere. So I think, the more field data, the better, in my opinion.
Absolutely. What these guys have said, larger scale for sure works. Wherever they do these test plots at and they give you this information, I don't know what kind of fertility they're doing. I know what's on our farm, and it may be totally opposite or 180 of what they're doing. But try to do it on a larger scale like that. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the answer Matt wanted to hear.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, let's open it up to questions from the group here. If you guys have any questions about, or for me or Matt, about our program, for the growers here who participated in the program this year, if you have any questions, we can open it up there. There's a couple microphones out there. You got one here.
Hey guys, could you talk about if there is or any of the extra time it takes to do the trials? I always like the idea of trying stuff and putting data together, see what works, what didn't, and 95% of the time I drop the ball in. Either there's weather coming in the spring, so I don't have time, I'll just plant it, or in the fall, okay, you record the data, and then as soon as I'm done with all the other stuff at harvest, and then I'll go through it and I drop the ball. So just what do you guys do to make sure everything gets carried through for good data?
Well, they had a protocol that we had to follow. Is that what you're asking about, what we had to do? So they give us a protocol, what we had to follow. So to get a viable test, in my eyes, I needed to follow that to a T so they could get good data to be able to give back to the grower, or whoever was wanting to look at it. But it took a little bit of time because for what we was doing, I didn't tank mix the product with my herbicide, so I made an extra pass by doing that. So it took a little bit of extra time. So on my part, when we got done spraying for the day, I come in, did it myself, after hours, and just went through the deal just so I could make sure I get the right data back. I did it myself instead of getting somebody else. But to get the data out that the farmer wants to see, you got to do the work on the front end for sure.
Yeah, and that's why I think you really want to try products. We will try about anything just because we're interested, but maybe specific for your farm, stuff that you really want to see, something that might improve your farm, because then I think you'll take the time to do it. And as far as the data goes, there's so many companies that have now been around for a while, and new companies that are coming out that we map every single pass across the field, from the planter to the sprayer to the tillage machine. So we're mapping every single pass, and that really makes it seamless at the end, or even in the combine. I'll be able to separate off this pass as I'm going through the field and see it. So I think that's what's really changed on our operation over the last 10 years, is just the implementing the new data technologies, I guess.
And the other thing I'll add is RJ is a pretty good cat herder. And so he sends out texts. It's getting close to planting time. Do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand how this product works? And we had his cell phone, he text, he'd email, and then here for the past month, I happened to harvest my soybeans relatively late, and just last week, RJ reminded me, you still haven't sent your data in, Brent. So, and it's in there now. It is in the system, RJ. It's garbage data because it's really bad, but it's there.
I was going to ask you about that, but I was going to wait until after.
He owned it.
Yeah, that's right.
I would just advise, there's thousands of different products you can try. Try to narrow it down to ones that solve a particular problem on your operation. I'm guilty of that. I've got 25 different products to try, and it does get to be a lot of work. And I try to focus on ones that add to an existing pass rather than creating another one. I mean, if you have to run a sprayer across there, that has to be included in the ROI, right? If you have to run an extra pass. So if it's a jug that dumps or a seed treatment that goes on, that kind of thing, those are attractive to me because they don't add any extra time, machine hours in the field necessarily. So maybe an extra thing to do when you're loading, then I can handle that.
Yeah, I might just add a couple things. One, we do compensate every grower who participates in the trial program because we do know it takes a little extra time. So, you're paid to do the trial. So there's a little bit in it for you as well to do it right and to share the data. But the other thing is we do try to keep you on the right path. So hopefully it's easy. And we try to, like every one of these guys, everybody in the program, I've had a personal conversation with ahead of time. I understand their operation. I understand what crops they grow, what their passes are. I try to find the right trials that they're interested in, that are a good fit for what they do, that will be the best fit to generate data that you're interested in. So having some personal interest in what you're testing is really important. It's not a coincidence that all these guys are very analytical. They like to look at the data. Even if we weren't paying them to do it, they would probably still be interested to do it because they want to gain some knowledge and see what we can learn to do better next year. But those are two things that we do specifically. We compensate and then we try to fit it into your operation as best as possible. Yeah, one more question over there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what would be your most notable change or product or something that you've tried in the past 3 years? I kind of heard different technologies like hydraulic downforce, soybean population, pivot bio. Maybe if you could all just give like your top one that you kind of have on your mind.
Start here, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess I kind of touched on this, as a product. It was, for me, and obviously we kind of hinted at it, pivot bio didn't work for us. We tried it 3 years and it didn't work. So, soybean fungicide was really one that sticks, and now with corn, I would say similar things. But ours is probably more of a, changing the structure of the farm and with strip till, I guess, after several years of testing and proving it that we can do it, I would say is basically is our biggest one, I guess.
I guess earlier I said, hydraulic downforce, that's one of the things. The other thing that two other things that we did was invest in a spray rig that's got individual nozzle shutoffs. So saving on herbicide right there, that's a game changer for sure. Instead of going out spraying a 40-acre field and using 43 acres of chemical, you're cutting it right down to the inch, with that thing. And then narrow row planter. We went to a narrow row this year, a drill, and that saved us a herbicide pass, going through the field, just because we were so dry early on. We was following the river down as it was, the flooding went down to come in and plant, and then the beans lap in the middle pretty fast, and then it saved us a herbicide spraying. So investing in a narrow row drill and then the individual nozzle shutoffs on a spray rig, that two things that's really helped out for us.
I would say the biggest change for us, and this goes back a little more than 3 years, but strip till, and somewhat from a tillage perspective, but also from a nutrient placement perspective, just getting better recoverability of nutrients that we're applying in that strip, placing them where the plant can get to them, not having to broadcast a bunch of nutrients, but keeping them right where the plant will be able to intercept those with the roots.
And it's not so much a change, but it's really a change in what I'm looking for. And it's really, I am looking in the biological sector a lot more. In theory, I believe there's something out there that'll work in my area. But I've been trying now for over 3 years to find one for one of my crops or two of my crops. And I haven't been able to recognize one yet that performs consistently in my environment. And that's not for lack of belief. I think there is something out there. So really that's what I'm looking at. I think that's the rest of the world is going to be driving us to be more efficient at what we do. And I think that is a sector where we can start cutting back on some inputs to satisfy those requirements and maybe add a little bit of money into our pocket at the end of the day at the same time.
Well, I think we're about out of time here. I want to thank you guys for volunteering and taking the time to share your experience with the program. I do want to do a quick plug. So if you guys are interested in participating in FBN's on-farm trial program, go to fbn.com/IRL, and there's a button on there that says register your farm. You can fill out a little bit of information about yourself that comes right to me, and then I'll be in touch with you pretty soon to just learn a little bit more like I did with these guys, learn about your operation, figure out what you're interested in, see if there's a trial that we have that might be a good fit for you. And then, of course, I'll be here all day today and tomorrow. So please come up to me and introduce yourself and let me know if you're interested. I'd be excited to learn a little bit more about you and go from there. But that's about it. Anything else, Matt?
No, thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time. And again, thanks to the panel, especially for agreeing to do this and for working with us. We really appreciate their time and a lot of great insights. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.